Welcome to this evening's TU Comes to You, Roots of Systemic Racism webinar. Thank you all for joining us and including the Giving Society members in attendance. We appreciate everyone's support. TU Comes to You is a web series that was created to provide a virtual learning experience for alumni and the Temple community. And these sessions feature our impressive Temple faculty and look to heighten our engagement through content-rich offerings. Before we get started, I just want to mention some housekeeping notes. This session will be recorded and will be added to the Alumni and Constituent Engagement Digital Library site. If you have any questions throughout the session, please put them in the Q&A box and we will answer them at the end. And this event is sponsored by the Temple University Regional Chapters and the Temple University Black Alumni Alliance, also known as TUBA. I would now like to introduce Dr. Natasha Patterson. She is the events chair on the TUBA board, and she will introduce Dr. Smith and moderate questions at the end. Dr. Patterson has been working in public health for over 20 years, focusing on communities that have been marginalized, from health education to cancer research to teaching for the past 14 years. She is currently an assistant professor of public health at the College of New Jersey, teaching health policy, organizational systems for graduate students, health education, leadership, and the internship courses for undergraduate public health students. She is working on health disparities research, most recently focusing on the disparities in Black maternal and infant mortality and morbidity. Dr. Patterson presents at international, national, and local conferences and sits on expert panels. Most recently, she co-created and moderated an interdisciplinary panel entitled Fighting the Infodemic, Public Trust, Public Policy, and Fake News. Dr. Patterson recently completed her PhD in education at Capella University. She received her Master of Public Health and Bachelor of Art degree in sociology from Temple University. Dr. Patterson is very active in the community. She serves as a mentor to high school and college students, providing guidance and encouragement during their educational journey. And she is the president of the National Association of University Women Suburban Philadelphia branch, and is also a member of the National Coalition of 100 Black Women, the PA chapter. She serves as a board member for Health Spark Foundation, and as I mentioned, the Temple University Black Alumni Alliance. She currently resides in Abington with her husband and 3 children. And I will now turn it over to Dr. Patterson.
Thank you, Shauna. So we welcome you this evening, and I am excited to introduce our speaker, our presenter for tonight, Dr. Erin Smith. Dr. Erin Smith is currently the assistant professor in the Department of Africology and African American Studies here at Temple University. He's an author, and he is also he has artistic presentation style that has gained him the name The Rapping Professor. During his short tenure at Temple University, Dr. Smith has quickly been recognized as a dynamic and innovative speaker, educator, artist, and facilitator who utilizes his vast wealth of knowledge, uncanny energy, and unique oratorical abilities to translate hip-hop culture into a universal language of leadership, learning, and love. During his professorship, he has been focused on developing unique and dynamic ways to actively engage the Gen Z students of today in an effort to solidify their love of learning. Welcome, Dr. Smith.
Hello, everybody. That was some intro. I was like, who they talking about? I forgot writing some of that stuff. I think it's true, though. I think it's true. I don't know. Fake news. How's everybody doing? I'm gonna check my time. I'm about to go off because I don't remember last time I got to present for Temple. So this needs to be extra special. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen and try to live up to that intro and waste no time. I'd like to begin with some inspiration from a philosopher. You may know him as Meek Mill. And I was so inspired by Mr. Mill, as I'll refer to him, that when I go to visit the young people primarily even when I go to the detention centers and things of that nature. I remix Meek Mill's Dreams and Nightmares, the best introduction of any hip hop album in history. Not up for debate, but and I talk to the young people, and I noticed that in order to get their attention, I usually have about 8 to 12 seconds before they put their hoods back on and their ear pods back in. So the key is to have the energy and to relate, and also to be sincere. Malana Karanga, the founder of Kwanzaa, said, if you can connect with people, you can teach them anything. But if you can't connect with people, he said, you can't teach them anything. So I say, in honor of Mr. Mill, I used to pray to speak like this to peeps like this, Coretta and Martin, queens and kings like this. In the back of a paddy wagon, cuffs was on my wrist, thinking, man, my ancestors had it worse than this. Now when our dreams take hold, nightmares are through. It's time to marry our destiny. Now say I do. Far as freedom, you gotta see it with a clear-eye view, so the ancestors could bless us like we said, that's you. But you gotta read. Let that breathe. For they come for me, I'm getting deep. I never let no fear get in between intended targets. Literally finish what you started. They love us deaf, dumb, and blind, but they hate it when we get smarter. I went and got it regardless. Vision it like an artist. When the struggle gets harder, remember that you the hardest. Be a god or a goddess, but people over your prophets. Pay no mind to them cowards. I tell them haters, I got this. See, I know that my mind is power. See, I'm teaching to take us higher. Here at Temple, we bring that fire. So I keep it real so the chosen can be inspired. Now, when you got your mind right, then the hate increase. They blaming it on sagging pants and copping beats. So I murder beats from the streets to the barbershop. Fans be like, oh, head, your bars are hot. You gotta pop. If you ain't talking about uplifting, what you talking about? Real gangsters move in silence. You see, some talk a lot. I'ma use my words, and I'ma use the word on my grind until we get what we deserve. Now get up. Hold up, wait a minute. They thought we was finished. Took away the money for the schools to build the prisons. Flexing on my haters just like Popeye with his spinach. Double M, yeah, I'm a G. I make a movement, making millions. Type to come with them Garvey and them Doc Asante quotes. Melissa Harris Perry, some Ta-Nehisi Coates. Some Mark Lamont Hill for their young minds to glow. If some names y'all ain't recognize, when then Google that when you go. Cause this more than about bill money or just keeping it real. Those who brought this truth before me been killed. They caught around, that put them down. They in the ground, no joke. So I come to make this clear for y'all. No mirrors and no smoke. Yo, all I know is learning. When it comes to me, I got books on Afrocentrics. I got books on Dr. King. Got my BA 3 MAs. And I got my PhD. So every time I give a lecture, I'll be turning up the heat. Ew, bars. It's for TU though, so you know I gotta be extra tonight. Let me check my time and do what I do. So, if you have not had an opportunity to begin watching Amend, The Fight for America, produced by Will Smith, I've been binge watching it and I highly recommend it. And I'll also be appearing on Fox 29 tomorrow morning. I think it's 8:15 to just make some commentary about the series. But very few series of its kind have been this honest and informative from a Black perspective. I said arguably since Eyes on the Prize, and I know there's people in the room old enough to relate. So it's always beautiful to have adults in the room. Okay, learn more, love more. I say that race is not a zero-sum game. Racism is. It's important to establish these parameters before having these conversations, because sometimes people can feel uncomfortable, and I realize that no one learns from being insulted, so this is not about guilt, blame, or shame. This is about collectively coming together to solve systemic and institutional inequities. Right? It's not a proverbial music of chairs. It's not they're taking our jobs type of vibe and any of that. And racism as a global system is one thing we definitely need to make sure we establish prior to getting into the specificities of the system itself. Black History Month. How many days we got left? Okay, we got a couple days left. So shouts out to Carter G. Woodson, father of Black history. Of course, began as Negro History Week, later turned into Black History Month. Not going to read all that for the sake of time, but we can make the deck available. And you can always screenshot, and it's being recorded. Ibram Kendi, TU alum. Make sure you go get Stamped from the Beginning, right? That History of Racist Ideas, as well as How to Be an Anti-Racist. And this quote is from that book. So fellow TU alum says, the only way to undo racism is to consistently identify it and describe it and then dismantle it. So we're going to be doing all three tonight, at least an effort in that direction, right? He describes it as a cancerous construct based on his own personal experiences with health concerns, and he saw the parallels between his diagnosis and the diagnosis he provided for the nation. For roughly 200,000 years before race and racism were constructed in the 15th century, humans saw color but did not group the colors into continental races, did not commonly attach negative or positive characteristics to those colors, and rank the races to justify racial inequity. To reinforce racist power and policy, racism is not even 600 years old. It's a cancer that we've caught early. I've had students in my class that said that racism has always been around. And I was like, wow, that's problematic, because that means there's a few things about the realities of history and genetics that you must not have gotten in school to think that's even a biological possibility. But I digress. So I believe in reverse racial engineering. People say, why are you a racial optimist? What do you mean by racial optimist? And I say that if you could be on a plantation and your grandmother was enslaved and your mother was enslaved and you've been enslaved your entire life, but you still bring 6 children, many of whom, if not all, will not even be with the family and after they come to a certain age, I say you have to have a certain degree of faith and optimism that despite everything that I see and despite everything that I've heard from the past generations, that a better tomorrow is possible. So that enduring faith, that optimism is what I refer to as my ancestral mandate. Ancestral mandate? What do you mean, Professor? I mean, when you look at your clock in the morning and when you think to hit the snooze button, but I know you never do because you went to TU, and then there's something in you that just lights like a fire. Because when I see AM on that clock, I think, somebody already called it, right? Ancestral mandate, right? I'm not thinking it's 6 a.m. I'm thinking ancestral mandate. There's a song called Revolution by Arrested Development. It's on the soundtrack to Malcolm X, right? And he says, Harriet Tubman told me to get on up. Marcus Garvey said to me, Gregory, get on up. My brother Malcolm X need I name more. It ain't like we never seen blood before. Come on. So I, like every morning I'm thinking Harriet Tubman's telling me, Ida B. Wells is telling me to get like every ancestral mandate. And in order to have that optimism, that mandate comes in handy, because when I'm watching recent events of the young brother Reinhold getting, murdered on a suspicion of jaywalking recently, I say, you got to know that Harriet Tubman has seen that much and more, right? Like I said, my ancestors been through worse than this, right? So I say anything that's been put together, anything that's been constructed, and race is a social construct, can be deconstructed, unpacked, right? So I don't care how far along down this rabbit hole we've gone. If there was a beginning, then we can get back to that beginning if we fundamentally understand its inner workings, the same way they can take a Lamborghini overseas and within a couple months take it apart and make their own, right? Okay. You get what reverse engineering. Shout out to my IT folks and my psych folks, right? We understand all this, right? Okay. So I'm applying these principles to this idea of race. And I believe that we can alter this faulted foundation. It is faulty, without completely compromising the entire structure. Dr. King said that a riot is the language of the unheard, right? And I was like, what type of level of communication breakdown must we have endured for people to think the only recourse they have is to vandalize, right? So whether it's the Capitol building or an AutoZone, I said, why not just keep the lines of communication open and extend the degree of grace and empathy and mutual understanding that we don't have to go through the hard part? I always marveled at those military engagement pictures where they say the North and the South came together and signed a peace treaty, right? After 1 million men fell on the battlefield. So in the beginning, y'all was talking, then the communication broke down, and then 1 million people had to be sacrificed and martyred, and then y'all came back and talked again? Well, how about we skip the part in the middle? Okay, I'm taking it too far now. Yeah, but I always wondered, let me do what I do. Individuals versus institutions. I'm gonna give y'all some takeaways tonight. You can use this with your friends and your family and your classes and all that, because some people seem to be confused. I like to shift the lens between race and gender, because when I'm in these conversations about gender, very seldom is there someone who stands up and says, well, I hear what you're saying about gender violence. I hear what you're saying about sexual assault. I hear what you're saying about equal pay, but I'm nice to the women I know. Because that would sound ridiculous. But AI crossover. But when you talk about race, every single time you start talking about institutional inequities, somebody wants to jump in there, super ally savior the situation, and be like, hey, all of my best friends are black. I whip a nene at the same time, and I make a mean oxtail, right? You don't know. I'd be like, wait a minute. That has not your individual participation or engagement. Why do I have to explain this, right? So I say we need to have a parameter, right, to establish the Okay, I'm gonna help y'all out. This is what you do. I learned this from Joy DeGroy, the author of The Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. And this exercise is something that can help you move forward and have productive conversations and engagements around issues of, wait for it, racism. Because a whole lot of people always saying, we want you to come talk about race, professor. I get invitations all the time. And I'll be like, you want me to talk about race or racism? Because it's going to be really hard to talk about racism if you can't even say the word, like it's Candy Man or something. You say racism. Ooh, okay. So I was so pleased. It's an honor, a privilege, and a pleasure to speak to a group that was, honest and open with the need and met the moment with the right rhetoric. So when I saw that invitation that said racism in it, I was like, that's what I'm talking about. Let me see. I don't know if I can I do something with the hand raise? I saw somebody had the hand raise. We could do it like that. I'm all with the call and response. Is there something I could do, or I just check the chat? No? Yes? Y'all let me know. Huh?
You can see a hand raise?
It says, I just saw a name and it says hand raised. But yeah, just type your questions in and I'll do a Q&A. We'll get all that. Mm-hmm. So check this out. This is what you need to do. Ready? Quick game. The game goes like this. Name all the ways that Europeans or white people have created, maintained systems, institutions that have made lives for African Americans more stressful, less advantageous, with access to resources and upward mobility, and possibly injurious even up to the point of death, right? And you think to yourself, all right, boom, 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 right? And I know you naming some names in your head. I'm gonna do this for the sake of time. I'm gonna run through it. And somebody might say, education, right? Somebody might say, redlining, right? Somebody might say, healthcare, right? Slavery, right? Right? Okay, and then you do this, and then you do this. Then you say, top one answer on the board. Shouts out to you, Barbara. Yes, housing, right? You say, name all the institutions, name all the systems that black people, African Americans, right? Name all the systems that have been created in this country by African Americans that have disadvantaged, made life less advantageous with less access to resources, upward mobility, could be injurious, even up to the point of death for white people, Europeans, and I'm still waiting. Because sometimes one of the biggest impediments to a productive conversation about the root causes of institutional and systemic racism is the idea of a false parity or false equivalency. That's why you get terms like reverse racism. See what I did there? You see how that only took a minute and a half, and we shut a whole lot of nonsense down before it can get started. You see how we did that? I'm gonna name 50 ways over here, and what's on your list? Oh, nothing, right? So that's why you won't hear me next month saying, why don't we get a Men's History Month? Really? Let me tell you what you're not gonna do. Okay, so exceptions versus rules. This was hard to explain in the contemporary context, so I gave a historical analogy that might help you to bring it home to some people that make it plain. They'd be like, Oprah Winfrey got money, Michael Jordan got all these rappers. And I'd be like, that's tantamount to somebody coming up to Frederick Douglass after he frees himself from slavery and says to Frederick Douglass, yo, what's wrong with your people? And he's like, what do you mean what's wrong with them? Enslavement's wrong with them. No, you got free. Why can't they? What? You work with Abraham Lincoln. What's wrong with the rest of them, right? So we need to know the difference between exceptions and rules and govern ourselves accordingly. So this is the question I start off with for my class. What was the first book ever written, the oldest book you know? Because Dr. Molefi Kete Asante, the great Dr. Molefi Kete, he says, as the chair of the Department of Africology and African American Studies, we got to start with chronology. And he's the first person to create a PhD program in African American Studies here at Temple University. We were the first. And he says, if you don't have a proper chronology, it's hard to jump around into the vacuum of history. So anybody, I don't know if you all have access to the chat, but if you do, you can type in some things. Oldest book you ever heard of in your life, the oldest book you know. Because when you're doing cinematography, you got to calibrate your camera with a white balance. When you're in a laboratory and you set your scale, you got to make sure your scale is level. Because if your scale's not level, and if the white balance isn't calibrated, everything else you try to interpret, engage, or understand will be distorted. So they say the Bible, they say the Iliad. I see some of this stuff on there, right? And then my students say the same stuff. They say Beowulf, right? So let's use the Iliad for example. So, I'm going to go here. This is called the Maxims of Ptah-hotep. You could Google that, Ptah, right? You type in first book ever, first oldest book, Ptah-hotep, right? I say this book is arguably been reported as being from 2880 BCE. right? 2880 BCE. And of course, the Bible had to be written AD because the person it was written about, okay, you get it. And he was about his father's business, studying the ways of Egypt, so he was reading, right? And Moses came down with the whole, the people was writing and reading, right? 10 Commandments. But, so let's just use the Iliad, for example. That's a popular one. 2880 BCE, almost 3,000 years to zero. The first voice of intelligence from the Greeks was Homer with the Iliad. That's 1000 AD. That's 4,000 years. I talked about the scale being off. 4,000 years. So I ask my students this. If you know that people existed for thousands of years, especially in Africa, but you think the first book was the Iliad in Greece, what would you subconsciously, at least, possibly think about Africans in comparison? They say, oh, you got a point there. I say, yeah. You're sitting around waiting for other people to come and teach us. And that's why even when people want to help sometimes, they approach it that way, right? This is Waset, later called Luxor by the Greeks, on the other image that you're looking at. I was just in Cairo this past year. Well, not this past year. This year was on freeze, right? Pause button. But when outside was a thing. Oh, so we went to Waset, which is the first university in the world, right? And I learned a lot about Socrates and Thales and Plato, going to Egypt to study at the feet of these African masters. And a lot of people say they want people to get along better. I'm saying, well, talk about how when Socrates went to learn with the black people, it wasn't no 2, 4, 6, 8, we don't integrate, nobody got lynched, right? But they don't want to tell the truth because they're so busy invested in this overall lie of Africa as a dark continent. Then honestly, this is part of where the roots of these systems come from. Once you tell one lie, I know there's no liars here at Temple because I know at Temple people, I'm lying now. But once you tell a lie, the rule is you got to keep lying. So they told this lie that nothing was over there, nothing to see here. And now to this day, despite the dollar bill, despite the fact that here at Temple University, we call our classes courses. A course is a block on a pyramid. The last course we take is called a capstone course, which is the top of a pyramid. Ain't no pyramids in Greece. Ain't no pyramid. Right in your face, using this African architectural design to structure education universally. But we got people down the street in North Philly saying college ain't for me. I say, you gave it to the world. You might want to check your history. There's a master teacher named Asa Hilliard. He said that our brains are like supercomputers. The more memory we have, the better we're able to engage phenomena, process information, and understand reality, right? So the more memory we have, the more powerful we... Okay, you get it. If you can't go back but so far, you can't do but so much. So one of the most criminal things that people do in academia is when they approach African history and black history and start with slavery. But I will make this point. People always talk about bootstraps and work hard and get a job. And I got to remind people, this is from Jamaica and other ones from America. But I was wondering if this is where the term run-of-the-mill came from. I got to do some etymological research on this one. But yeah, so people at times would even fall into some of these machines. And they would have enslaved Africans throughout the diaspora that were killed sometimes, falling into machines. And you see, okay, you get it, right? But yeah, you got to remind people sometimes. You talk about hard work. If it was about merit and hard work, the inequities would not be what they are. My favorite speech from the great Emancipator, one of my favorite quotes, is when he clearly says, I will say that I am not, nor ever have been in favor of bringing about in any way, because people love talking about recent politicians and how racist they sound. And I'll be like, more memory you have, you're less likely to be surprised, and you can contextualize racist rhetoric appropriately. Because I haven't heard nothing in the past 8 years that hit. Okay, let's do it. I never have been in favor of making voters or jurors of Negroes, nor of qualifying them to hold office, nor to intermarry with white people. And I will say, nobody asked him nothing, he adding on. And I will say, in addition to this, that there is a physical difference between the white and black races, which I believe will forever forbid the two races living together on terms of social and political equality. And in so much as they cannot so live, while they do remain together, because he was trying to send us back, after we finished all the free work, the colonization thing, trying to get some boats together, but 4 million people. Didn't really work out, right? There must be the position of superior and inferior, and I, as much as any of other man, I should say, am in favor of having the superior position assigned to the white race. You can't find me no quote in your lifetime that does nothing more than what that one just did. That is eugenics, white supremacy, that is inequity, that's all, everything wrapped up in one quote, and they got the nerve to promote to our children psychological warfare. Psychological warfare. The same way you see them young African Americans in the gospel choir down at the city hall during Columbus Day, singing the national anthem and doing drill teams. And I say my Jewish brothers and sisters never would do that. They don't celebrate Hitler because they know their history, and they say never forget. So I say take notes, never forget. Don't let nobody have your babies out there celebrating the genocide of your ancestors. Letting them name schools and bridges and all of that and holidays and mattress sales after people that didn't even think you were physically. Man, there's a whole lot more stuff that needs to be taken down and changed. We just getting started. Convict leasing system. People love saying a long time ago, so I like to use this trailer from this Slavery by Another Name PBS special. Slavery by Another Name on the system of convict leasing. If you're not familiar, get familiar. And if you want to teach somebody else, this is one of the better sources. PBS, Slavery by Another Name. It's only a minute.
For a period of nearly 80 years between the Civil War and World War II, black Southerners were no longer slaves, but they were not yet free.
What happened in that period of time was so much more terrible than anything most Americans recognize or understand today.
In one of the most shameful chapters of American history, generations of black Southerners were forced to labor against their will.
Free black people could be just picked up and put in jail. The sheriff department could sell people to corporations and coal mines.
He locked me up for 3 days. And after that, he said, if I don't go to work, he'll put me in the river down there.
People's lives were truly stolen from them. Their freedom was taken away.
All the southern states use the criminal justice system to put African Americans back into a position as close to slavery as they possibly could.
These were real people who were deemed to be of no value. Maybe now, through the telling of this history, these individuals can receive some measure of justice.
Again, Slavery by Another Name. I'm giving you some greatest hits for the sake of time. One of the most under-investigated and replicated periods of African American history was the period of Reconstruction. And I think part of that is because this linear concept of progress, and progress as it relates to proximity meaning progress, right? This proximity equals progress paradigm, right? For the alliteration fans out there, that took place in the 60s with the sitting at the Woolworth counters. It flies in the face of that. So for those that don't know, we had the right to vote right after enslavement as far as the black men who were participating in the process. And we need to understand how we got the clocks knocked back, because the Voting Rights Act recently got gutted. And if we had more information and understanding of our history, maybe it wouldn't have been taken for granted or thought of as something fixed in perpetuity, and instead something that needed to be vigorously defended at all costs, especially if there was a black president elected, because history would tell us that after any step forward, there's an attempt at a major backlash and pushback. Let's watch.
Most of us know our country fought a civil war in the 1860s, but less is known about what came afterward, the chaotic, exhilarating, and ultimately devastating period known as Reconstruction. It was a moment of profound change, with promises of citizenship and equal rights for all. One of the greatest achievements of Reconstruction was granting black men the right to vote. In 1867 alone, over 80% of all the black men in the former Confederate states registered to vote. 3 years later, Hiram Revels was elected the first black man to serve in the United States Senate, and Joseph Rainey became the first black United States congressman. Their election paved the way for more than 2,000 black office holders who served at every level of government during Reconstruction.
There are not many moments in recorded human history where a group that was so subordinated would, within the space of a decade, actually be integrated into the highest echelons of political society.
But the momentum wouldn't last. Black men's access to the ballot box, along with other key rights gained during Reconstruction, were rolled back systematically throughout the South. In 1875, near the end of Reconstruction, the 44th Congress included 7 black House members and a United States Senator. By 1900, only one remained, Congressman George Henry White of North Carolina.
By the time George H. White leaves office in 1901, he literally turns the light off on national black political leadership. No one will come behind him for an entire generation.
One of the cruel ironies of Reconstruction is that black people could claim certain rights in the 1870s that they would have to fight to reclaim in the 1960s. A sobering reminder that achievements thought permanent can be overturned and rights can never be taken for granted.
So, one thing that's important to note is that arguably the greatest act of collective forgiveness in the history of all humanity very might well be just after the Emancipation Proclamation, because if you recall, I don't see any slave revolts or even freed revolts after the Emancipation Proclamation. Because usually if somebody's been violating your family, exploiting your labor and, breeding your children and, you would want revenge. So it's really, I wouldn't say ironic, but it's really telling about the true grace and spirit of a people that should be replicated and should be understood and investigated. How did you not want to take the head off of every slave master you saw? You telling me you got free after 246 years and all you want to do was make the Union more perfect? You want to continue to fight in wars and make inventions and make sure that the promise that of America's... Oh, wow, that is admirable. That is noble. That is something that I don't know if any other group can say they've ever done. So I think if you want an example of what kindness looks like, and if you want to see how amazing it is for those very people just years later to be looked at as the most violent and the most vengeful and the most fearful, then you need to understand the type of negative campaign and revisionist history that took place, despite the fact, as I say again, the greatest act of human forgiveness in the history of humanity was when 4 million Africans said, you know what? We're not even trying to match evil for evil. When they go low, we're going to go to the White House, build our own towns, Edenville and Tulsa, not knowing they was going to try to burn them down. But, okay, so 400-year head start. Anti-racist activist Tim Wise is about to, in about 5 minutes, he's going to talk about a lot of these major policies, one of which that I think is very important. He starts with the Head Right program. If you're not familiar with the Head Right program, the way he connects that program to the rest of these programs that you probably are familiar with is very interesting.
1/100th the damage of the not-so-usual suspects whose actions actually are far more contributory to our current situation and the global situation. So that wealth disparity has got nothing to do with merit, talent, intelligence, hard work, or investment strategies. It has to do with the fact that some folks had a head start. And that head start doesn't go away just because you pass the Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act, Fair Housing Act. In fact, let's understand the real basis of that head start, because this is clearly something some people are confused about right now. Particularly these folks who keep yelling and screaming about how they don't want the government intervening in the economy. And they don't want the government intervening in healthcare. And they don't want the government managing. They just want the market to control everything. They just want small government. See, that's precious to me. Coming from people who never objected to big government when it was creating white wealth, when it was creating the white middle class. Make no mistake, that is what did it. Wasn't hard work and initiative in some vacuum, because most people in a competitive society have to work hard or they sink. So that sort of goes without saying. White, black, brown, doesn't matter. People tend to work hard and do so in relatively similar numbers. But what did matter is that the government of the United States stepped in and created wealth for white folks. Big government did that. We need to understand that's where the Head Start comes from. And this thing goes back an awful long ways. Actually goes back to the colonies in the 1630s and 1640s. There was a program in place. My family actually took advantage of it when one of the branches came during that period. You may or may not have heard about it. Odds are not, because we don't talk about it in school. But it was this thing called the Head Right program. The Head Right program was a program that allowed male heads of household from England who came to the United States to claim 50 acres of land and the tools with which to work it for nothing, just for making the trip. Now, you see, you give out 50 acres of land and some tools to black people, and we call that a handout. We call that welfare. We might even call that reparations. You give out 50 acres of land and some tools to white folks, we call it nation building. See how that works? It's fascinating, the different kind of rhetoric that we use. Millions of acres of land were given out that way over a period of a very short period of time. Fast forward to the 1860s. Homestead Act of 1862 gets passed. What does it do? Gives out 240 million or more acres of land for virtually nothing to white families. People of color almost completely barred from being able to take advantage of it. 240 million acres of virtually free land. The free market can't do that. Let's just at least agree on that. The small government can't do that. The market cannot take other people's land and give it to you, right? Only a very large government with guns is capable of doing that. And that's what happened, of course, because this had been somebody else's land before, and then it got taken and redistributed. And yet what's interesting is I haven't seen a single one of the families, because there are 20 million white folks in this country today, some estimate as many as 50 million, but at least 20 million, who are the direct descendants of those people who got Homestead Act benefits, many millions of them living on that land, living on those ranches, living on those farms, living in those houses. Not one of them has showed up in Washington, D.C. and said, you know what, I got to give this back, because it seems to me that if I keep this property that the government made possible, that'd be like, what would that be like? What's the word? That'd be like socialism. So here, y'all can take this back, because I didn't get it fair and square, you see, but no one does that. Fast forward to the 20th century, not even the early 20th, the middle. So we're talking about the lifetimes of people in this room, and for others of you, certainly the lifetimes of your parents and grandparents. Right? From the 1930s until the 1960s, the first 30 years of the Federal Housing Administration Home Loan Program, add to that the VA Home Loan Program, added to that in the 1940s. What were these? These were government-created programs to subsidize indirectly by way of guaranteeing with taxpayer dollars private loans from banks. Prior to the creation of the FHA, banks would not lend money to working-class people, didn't matter what color you were. They just didn't want to do it because the risk was too great. So even if you were white, didn't matter. If you didn't have enough to pay like half the down payment up front and you could pay it off in 10 years, you weren't getting a mortgage. That was the way it was. The government steps, so there was no middle class. I mean, there just wasn't any. The government steps in, creates the FHA program, later the VA program. What do these do? They basically say, don't worry, if the borrowers default, right, it'll be backed up by the full faith and credit of the United States Treasury, which is to say the taxpayers of the United States. So you'll get your money back, or at least some portion of it. And that made the banks willing to lend to lower income and working class white families who previously would have had to rent, just like black and brown families that wouldn't have been able to buy. But the problem was the FHA, which now is like a universal, a lot of you when you get your first home will probably get an FHA loan. That's what you do. It's low interest, the terms are good, you don't have to have a lot down, that kind of thing. But in the first 30 years of that program, it was almost exclusively for whites. Because the underwriting criteria that the banks were using that was actually given to them by a quasi-public institution, right, known as the Home Ownership Lending Corporation, which was created during this period. The underwriting criteria that they used basically made it impossible for people of color to get these loans, even though they were guaranteed with taxpayer money, including the money of black and brown taxpayers. But the way the criteria was written, 98% of all the loans went to white families. By 1960, 40% of all white family mortgages were being written under this one preferential policy. Government policy, $120 billion worth of housing equity loaned from the early 1940s, late 30s until the early 1960s at a time when people of color couldn't get in on that. $120 billion head start. And again, if you do that for people of color, that's affirmative action, that's racial preference, that's welfare, that's a handout. You do it for white folks, it's good macroeconomic policy. Right? And of course, it was good macroeconomic policy. Would have been even better had it been extended to people of color, because you'd have had an even bigger economic stimulus, but they weren't thinking in those terms. So you have the FHA, the VA program, even black and brown veterans excluded from the loans that were available under the VA program. You have the GI Bill, which in theory was available to all returning veterans after World War II in Korea, but in practice, the disproportionate benefits went to white veterans, because if you were a veteran of color, the employers, because theoretically what the GI Bill did, it said you could get training, to have a job, you could go to college, you get these opportunities, but the employers still had the right of refusal. They still had the right to not hire you, to discriminate against you on the basis of race. Their property rights as owners were given precedence over the right of those returning GIs to have jobs. You couldn't just go to any college if they didn't want to admit you, so people of color were still excluded even after they had served the country in the military. So you had all of these programs, Homestead Act, VA, FHA, GI Bill, go all the way back to the headright system, all these things pumping literally hundreds of billions, one might say trillions of dollars worth of wealth into white folks' hands before people of color even got to the starting gate.
So you can imagine when I watch TV, I don't know what people be talking about. They be like, well, they need to, I be like, they need to what? they need to what? How you gonna have all that free stuff and even talk? Like, you shouldn't even be talk. America, we're gonna take it. What? Why I did? Okay. Interestingly enough, I usually use The Matrix, Alice in Wonderland, Planet of the Apes is one of my favorites. Spoiler alert, because they thought that they were on these other people's land when the whole time they were on their own land. But the people tricked them and told them they hadn't contributed anything. That's how I felt when I went to the Washington Monument, and nobody told me it was a copy of the ancient obelisk, the Tekanus from Egypt, and the whole layout from the pillars to the pond in Washington was all over there in Africa the exact same way, right? So it was the same type thing when they saw the Statue of Liberty. That's how I felt when I saw the Washington Monument and learned the truth about it. Or when I saw the Papyrus of Ani and I saw the weighing of the heart, when I saw the scales of justice and the jury system and Jehudi, the first stenographer, thousands and thousands of years, you written on a wall in a temple. And I said, why every time I go to a law school, all I see is men that look like Santa Claus, but here I'm seeing the origins of all the symbols of the legal system right here in Africa, right? So it's this unplugging from this matrix where you can, get to a point where you can make some real progress, but you got to understand how these systems are in place and why there's so much emphasis on distortion and deception to make sure they are maintained. Here's a couple ads that we talked about, these opportunities, right? Or what Ta-Nehisi Coates calls in the Case Reparations Atlantic Magazine, plunder, right? Look, Mena, Arkansas. Shout out to Bill Clinton, right? Cool summers, mild winters. Look, no mosquitoes, no drought, no Negroes, right? Everything you need, right? And then people in these neighborhoods, they grow up and they're like, they come to Temple, they'll say, hey, I grew up in a white neighborhood. But they don't know why. They go, I'm from Levittown, PA. I say, Levittown? Well, I got some stories for you. Similarly, people grow up in Newark, New Jersey, Baltimore, North Philly. They get to college. They make good for themselves. They get out. But somewhere deep in their psyche and in their subconscious, there's still a disconnect. There's still a lack of understanding. There still might be some degree of shame. There still might be a feeling like they're special and different from the rest of their people, right? Because they don't understand why they were ever there in the first place. So if you don't know how your community was created, even if you escape it, don't get too deep, Professor. They're going to pass a plate. Okay. Wall Street. First stock market, first hot stock sold on Wall Street was, of course, these Africans. They actually built the wall, right? Ironically, people have been building walls for a long time, and this wall didn't work either because they built the wall but didn't pay attention to the other side, and the British came in, and they came in from York, and when they took the area, guess what they called the area? New York, right? So people have been failing at wall building. Okay, let me just keep this party going. Policing. I'm going to finish this strong. I'll do like 10 minutes. So we talk a lot about, the history of policing and the connection between these slave patrols, paddy rollers, and the fact that the institution was originally instituted to protect property owners and to manage black rebellion and revolts, right? So, and I always say, if I'm sitting at my computer and I'm telling you what I see right now, shout out to Tupac in the back. I got to teach a class called Tupac and the Hip Hop Revolution. I didn't want you to think I was just that ratchet, in my professional life. If I'm telling you what I see right now, I'm telling the truth. And if I asked anybody who's watching this broadcast to tell me what you see right now, we might see very different things because we live in a three-dimensional world where perspective matters. But it doesn't mean anybody's wrong. What I try to bring my students from various walks of life to understand as we walk together through this history and information is that just because it's not your experience doesn't make it wrong. So if your experience is the police are always very helpful to you, and they've always protected your property, then your experience is valid and that's what you think. What college is about, this critical thinking, this understanding of other people's perspectives, so you can endeavor to get into debates and disagreements with people who have, facts as their basis, so it helps you to grow and establish and strengthen your own arguments, is that other people should not be expected to feel like you feel if they didn't experience what you experience. So if I was a descendant of one of these enslaved Africans, my outlook and my engagement with said institution, even if members of my family like they do work for said institution, might be different. And I think it's important to respect and acknowledge that, right? Because there seems to be a lack of empathy and respect for personal experience that permeates this whole idea that career is a life, right? Like a blue life, even though you can resign the second you get caught on tape doing something wrong. And we can't resign from being black, last I checked. Medical experimentation. I always suggest, I see med school students and I'll be like, do you got medical apartheid? I make sure that they get Harriet Washington medical apartheid because they be thinking it was just Tuskegee, the dark history of medical experimentation on black Americans from colonial times to the present. Because they be like, why don't the black people want to take the vaccination? And I'll be like, I got a couple ideas. Why? Maybe I'm not. Holmesburg Prison, shouts out Acres of Skin. That's right here in PA where they did it to the prisoners, right? This ain't even the LSD or none of that stuff. This is just, okay, we keep this going. I'm gonna finish strong. Of course, there's Bad Blood, Tuskegee syphilis experiment. And I don't get caught up in the color thing because for those that know, they had an African-American doctor, male and they had a black nurse that would go and reassure the black men when they were getting these placebos and the syphilis was allowed to run through hundreds of their bodies and give it to their wives and all that. There was a black nurse and a black doctor, right? And I also I always show this video about the Ghost of Mississippi. If you've never seen that documentary, please, the Mississippi Sovereignty Commission. That Fred Hampton movie is placing a whole lot of light on the whole COINTELPRO snitch thing. The Mississippi Sovereignty Commission was the spy agency of Mississippi that worked against the civil rights movement, and they would enlist all types of black folks, even preachers. There was a black preacher that volunteered to take people's money at his congregation and then report his own congregation members, take pictures of license plates and everything else, and report his own black folks to the FBI. So I'll be like, don't get caught up in a color thing and end up infiltrated like Malcolm X, like Fred Hampton, we saw the Malcolm X stuff just came out. Okay, Henrietta Lacks, right? They took her cells, made the healer cells, didn't tell her family. Some of her family's still dealing with healthcare bills and difficulties. They talking about y'all could sit on a board. They ain't giving none of them billions, though. And of course, we have J. Marion Sims, so-called father of gynecology, who leased out African-American women and then operated on them cut into my sisters with no anesthesia because he thought that somehow, just like people say today, that we were just more impervious to pain. And that's why even people like Serena Williams had to get a fourth and a fifth assessment, before she even got diagnosed properly. And she's rich and famous and arguably the best, most dominant athlete in the history of sports. But I digress. And there's another book called Medical Bondage, which talks about similar topics. Last video, until I get to the last little quick clip. But this one, I just want to show a couple minutes because if you've never read the book Color of Law, Mr. Rothstein, he dispels this myth about public housing. And in a good 2 or 3 minutes, he's going to explain, I'm going to fast forward a little bit, about the history of public housing.
Or it happened because explicit government policy.
I'll go right there.
De facto segregation is an utter myth. There is no basis to it whatsoever. The racial segregation in every metropolitan area in this country was created by racially explicit government policy designed to create racial boundaries, designed to ensure that African Americans and whites could not live near one another, with policies that are so powerful that they still determine the racial landscape that we see in cities all over the country. Just like we have the myth of de facto segregation, we also think we know what public housing is.
Listen.
It's a place where poor people live, where lots of mothers with children, single parents with children, lots of young men without access to jobs in the formal economy, acting out, engaging in oppositional behavior that attracts attention to the police and a cycle of violence that we've seen in so many places. That's what we think of as public housing. But that's not how public housing began in this country. Public housing began in this country as a program for middle-class, working-class families. During the Depression, poor people were not permitted into public housing when public housing was first created. There was a housing shortage, and public housing was created for people who could afford to pay the full rent in housing, and they did in public housing, but for whom there was no housing available. Everywhere, the Public Works Administration and the other federal agencies that succeeded it created segregated public housing, separate projects for African Americans and whites in cities all across the country, frequently segregating neighborhoods that hadn't previously been segregated, that were integrated. During World War II, the actions of the government intensified to create segregation. They intensified because throughout the country, hundreds of thousands of workers flocked to centers of defense production, of war production, to take jobs that hadn't existed during the Depression. And the migration of workers into centers of defense production overwhelmed frequently the communities where they were working. The federal government had to build housing for these workers if wanted the ships to be produced.
Listen to this.
For the African Americans, they built the housing on temporary housing because the explicit goal of the housing was that African Americans after World War II would leave and go back to the South. So they built temporary housing for the African Americans along the railroad tracks and near the shipyards. And they built more stable housing for the white migrants in the white residential areas. Very soon after.
People love saying, my so-and-so came from whatever country, and I'd be like, first of all, if you just came from another country, then you weren't here for the whole enslavement part. That might be part of the reason, but I digress, right? Even when they got here, they were treated very differently the whole time. People love saying, well, I know somebody who came here with nothing. Well, they were human beings. There's only one instance in history where a group of people were relegated to the status of property below human beings. People have been peons. People have been serfs. Yes, the name slave comes from the Slavic people in Europe and their experience, but they were still people. When you take a people and relegate them to something other than people, you have no business, no right to compare their experiences and their response to anybody who hasn't been relegated to anything other than a human being. It's offensive when people say, why can't y'all get it together? Were they enslaved? Were they not people? Were they like, why would you even compare? Even a comparison is offensive. So no, people don't know that. So nothing's wrong with your grandmother and your uncle and all your people that are still in the hood, or if you got that experience. Because sometimes people wonder in the back of their mind, why can't we get it together? I'm showing you why. Because people got together before us to make sure we couldn't get nothing or get what we had together. And when we did get it together, word to Tulsa, Oklahoma, they would bomb it and take it and riot. 2/3 of human history occurred on the continent of Africa before any migration. Let me say that one more time. 2/3 of human history. That means boom, boom, and then that last little part is every other nation you've ever heard about. So when you go into a world history class and they start you in Greece, Matrix, you completely lost. You'll never get Imhotep, Akhenaten, Akhunnu, early philosophers. You'll never get Queen Nzinga, Yasantiwa, Cleopatra. You'll never get Queen T. You'll end up talking more about women's empowerment in the context of burning bras than leading nations and leading men into battle, because they don't want to give you the black women empowerment. So they give you this pseudo, fake, symbolic empowerment. When ideally, most people study their apex. That's why we look at ancient Egypt, even though it wasn't first, people argue it was the best. That's why they take Greece. That's why, like what China is to Asia, he said that Dr. Sani said Kemet needs to be to Africa, the same way that Rome and Greece is to Europe. But people look at their heights. The reason why you're not giving those women is because it's not about women's empowerment sometimes. It's more about racists with vaginas wanting to push an agenda more so than they want to truly give examples of empowerment, because then they have to tell the truth about black people. Let me let Dr. King take us out of here with this last one. We get this Q&A, because people are always talking about this dream, but he was talking about this check. He's going to he's going to predate Tim Wise in talking about all these advantages and just how tragically ironic that the very same people that talk to us about our bootstraps done got more free stuff than any group of people probably ever got in history. More free stuff, a free continent. Let's start there. Okay. Talk to him, King. We go to Q&A after this.
At the same time that America refused to give the Negro any land, through an act of Congress, our government was giving away millions of acres of land in the West and the Midwest, which meant that it was willing to undergird its white peasants from Europe with an economic floor. But not only did they give the land, they built land-grant colleges with government money to teach them how to farm. Not only that, they provided county agents to further their expertise in farming. Not only that, they provided low interest rates in order that they could mechanize their farms. Not only that, today, many of these people are receiving millions of dollars in federal subsidies not to farm, and they are the very people telling the black man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps. And this is what we are faced with, and this is a reality. Now, when we come to Washington, in this campaign, we are coming to get our check.
We coming to hold hands. We coming to sing. We coming to wave signs. We coming for aesthetic symbolism and symbolic protest. No, strategy and economic engagement. A promissory note that wasn't kept. But every year they keep giving you the same 20 seconds of a speech that talked more about police brutality than it ever did about dreaming. He mentioned police brutality twice, a dream once. But when you can, manipulate and distort history, you can even use somebody's martyrdom against the very people that they gave the ultimate sacrifice for. And that is why you could take a man who had a poor people's campaign that wanted all type of economic equality and strategies like Operation Breadbasket and the Montgomery bus boycott, and you can trick 1 million black people to work for free to honor a man that was trying to make sure y'all got paid. See if you catch me painting a locker anywhere, anytime soon. Ain't that a good game? To get you re-enslaved, I don't mean that, to get you to work for free, come honor Dr. King, come paint for free. Wait a minute, is that what Dr. King would want? Or would Dr. King want us to step up this talk about police brutality and systemic racism and economic inequality? But when you let somebody else, Q&A. I did what I did today. Now we transform. But one thing you could do, especially for my teachers out there, please stop playing hangman. I grew up in the school where I was the only black person in my grade, and they'd be like, hangman! And I'd be like, what part of the game is this? We ain't never played no Japanese internment. We never played no Holocaust. Why are we playing lynching games to learn how to spell? We don't need extrajudicial murder in the 3rd grade to teach us our letters and our like what? But if you type it into your phone right now, into your app store, ooh, the lack of cultural sensitivity is baffling. We got a long way to go. Asante Sana, thank you very much. Q&A all day. I don't know how y'all usually do it, but let's get to it. Drop the mic.
Wow, what a so much information, so much. I think, you know, I'm seeing some sentiments in the Q&A. Some folks are ones that I'm stunned with this information and the connection that you're making. No question, just that they can formulate at this time. I'm very glad that this is being recorded. I want to show my family. I know stuff and learn stuff, but I didn't know all of this, so thank you. Somebody else was asking about the books that you shared. So was there a book about the name of the book that the medical staff at the prison did experiments on?
Acres of Skin. Yeah, Acres of Skin, the Holmesburg Prison Experiments here in Pennsylvania.
So Acres of Skin is the name of the book. There was an earlier question when you shared the information about the prisons and the work enslavement.
Convict leasing program. Yep.
So somebody said, isn't that the same? Is that the same thing that's happening with prisons today, with privatized prisons using work programs?
Yes, and if you remember, there was some negative campaigning against Kamala Harris about what happened in California when they had the wildfires, and the people came out and basically admitted, we can't let them out of prison because they the ones fighting the fires, and we can't give up all that free labor right now. They basically just came out and said it, and they tried to, backpedal afterwards. But yes, and I tell my students, in order to vote on these things, you have to know the history. You have to know the history in order to vote on mass incarceration, defunding police, all these different things that are said. If you don't have it in historical context, it might be difficult to make decisions, in your own best interest.
Mm-hmm. I have another question. I get so angry when I hear people make racist remarks, and I can argue till the cows come home, but I feel like it doesn't make a difference. I cannot change their minds. What suggestions do you have for me to move things forward with these people?
I believe in a critical mass. All these big breakthroughs have never included all the people. I know that the Amend series talks about people like Bull Connor and George Wallace, right? If you're familiar with the civil rights movement, with the tanks and the segregation now, segregation forever, right? Some people will be on the wrong side of history. Some people were just on the wrong side of history last month. Like, it'll happen. Not everybody's coming, and I've heard things about not casting pearls before swine and dusting off your sandals. And there's times you got to do what you could do and keep it moving. But as long as you got enough people, right? A lot of people aren't for same gender marriage. But guess what? Stuff still gets passed. A lot of people weren't for women having the right to vote. Whatever, right? You just have to understand that you don't need everybody. That's something that black people say all the time. We got to get together. Not all of us. Those agents I was talking about, they can stay where they at, right? I just need enough people who are focused and create a tipping point, critical mass, create a tipping point to move things forward. So if you reach an impasse with somebody where they aren't willing to make any progress, always remember the one thing you cannot instill in another person is willingness. So if you don't want to learn, if you don't want to grow, if you don't want to be better, if you don't want to make progress, quote unquote, then there's nothing more to discuss, and you go find somebody that does.
Thank you. So what is the solution for schools and neighborhoods that are still very segregated? What changes?
Well, ironically, like I said with reverse engineering, how did we get here? Like, how they had those questions in bold print. You'd go back in the chapter when we were in grade school and you see the little, bold, definitions. If someone said to a class, if this was my class, and I said, how did we get here in 10 words or less? Some people might say government policy. That might be a good answer, right? Handouts, government policy. So how do we get out? Right? There's no way we're going to bootstrap ourselves out of trillions and trillions of dollars of generational wealth. Right? I don't even know how many degrees me and you got between us, but we ain't gonna make trillions and trillions of dollars in free land like that. There's no amount of merit and initiative that's gonna repair that. That's why even today, when we make the same amount, the wealth disparity based on generational transfers of wealth, which is the way most wealth is made every generation anyway. Somebody gives it to somebody else, right? Same thing happened with Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates, right? All the workers in the world ain't going to be as much as people handing down stuff to their own sons and daughters. So in order to rectify what was given by government policy and backed often by guns, we're going to need the same thing. When they had the European Recovery Act, the Marshall Plan, right? 1948. Like King said, they were willing to undergird Europe with an economic floor, while they were still telling black people they couldn't have even their 40 acres from the 250 years of what they just did. They was at war and gave them money. Japanese internment got money. Holocaust survivor got money. Like, what's the solution? Do what you did the last 20 times, because you gave more reparations than any nation I ever heard of. We help repair whenever there's in military engagement. The victor pays the reparations. That's why we were paying for training in Iraq. After we bombed them to oblivion, we paid for them to come back up. So you telling me you could pay Iraq, you could pay Germany, you could pay everybody, but you can't pay the people that helped you to get the money in the first place to even pay anybody? Like, it's not a mystery to me. The same thing how about this? Undo what you did and we'll be 80% there. But then you got to talk about reservations and things like that. And people are going to start raising their hands and say, why are you at it? and people know that if they open those floodgates of justice and equity, even France said if we let Africa trade their natural resources at market value, they'll be relegated to a third world status within a matter of a few months. So leaders of France have repeatedly over the generations have said, we can't let Africa be free and independent or we won't be France. Because we rely on France. There's a documentary called Stealing Africa. You could type that in at your leisure. Stealing Africa is about Glencore and the copper mines in Zambia and how this town in Switzerland took a vote to give like 2% of the money back to all the people that were decimated in Zambia. And guess what? The vote was rejected almost unanimously. There was like two nice white people that was like, yo, we're making all this money. This guy that owns Glencore lives here, so all of us get these crazy tax breaks. Instead of 10%, let's do 8%, right? And they were like, no. Meanwhile, they're spewing all kind of sulfur in the air. The children are walking around all this trash in Africa. Then they're going to get on TV talking about something. Give 30 cents a day. No, just give them their stuff. Let them sell their resources at market value. They'd be the world power overnight. But the people in France was more honest with it. America tried to be slick and try to act like you helping. In France, they was like, no. Them coming up means the end of what we got going on because we kind of got it off of their backs. And of course, shout out to Haiti with the colonial, tax and all that. But we digress. Ça passe, n'a pas l'air.
So I have another question. I moved from Brooklyn to Mississippi 9 years ago. Do you think Stacey Abrams can replicate what she did in Georgia in more rural states?
Definitely, but I think it's a cat and mouse game. We see the backlash. If you ever saw the book White Rage, right? White Rage is powerful. Carol Anderson of Emory University, and she talks about how every time we take these steps forward, people conspire. There was a beautiful news coverage about Obama when the Republicans were talking about his win. And they basically said while he was dancing with Michelle and Beyonce was singing, they met privately and started to devise plans to obstruct everything he attempted to do for the next 4 years. Ended up being 8, but that wasn't their plan. But I'm just saying, like, the fact that people say like people never sleep, like evil, like they were adamant. And it's almost like back in the day, you had to pay for the slave quarters, pay for the slaves' clothes, pay for the slaves' food. And today, you got to pay for your own cap and gown, pay for your meal plan, pay for your... Let me stop. But they update the system is what I'm trying to say. Let me not mess up my check. But they update the system. So we have to be very vigilant. Put it this way, they saw what she was able to do. So it's not just about praying for Stacey. We got to make sure that we're ready for the updated racism. They were snatching mailboxes, y'all, off the corners. So I don't know what they're going to try next, but you got to play three-dimensional chess. And you got to be like, and you got to really sit and think, what might they try next? Because you can't be totally caught off guard and shocked by it. And if you can get ahead of what somebody's plan is, that's the easiest way to thwart it. So they watch what Stacey Abrams did. They know where she's at. Trust me, they're planning, plotting, and strategizing, word to Pac. And we need to be the same way and not just think we're going to do the same thing and have the same results, because that's seldom what happens.
Okay, we're gonna take two more questions because
Okay.
we're at the end of our time. So we have one is how can I help in Utah, USA? Tell the history, change today. I want to see everyone get vaccinated. What can we do?
Well, I keep suggesting that amend the Fight for America special, executive produced by Will Smith, because he gave an understanding of Frederick Douglass' importance to the sustaining of the nation, not just the preservation and saving of the Union. Like, Frederick Douglass was the one who knew what was going on, and then he finally convinced Lincoln. And then they show later on how Dr. King did the exact same thing to Kennedy. Kennedy didn't know what was going on in these streets till it was way too late. Kennedy was hearing King thinking he wasn't accurate until, later on he's like, oh, I guess you was right. So I think that a lot of the work has already been done. Like, if somebody watches Eyes on the Prize and watches Skip Gates special and watches, this new special, like, a part of it, just do the due diligence. Google is everybody's friend nowadays. And if somebody wants to learn, again, the willingness component, but once somebody is really interested in learning and wants to learn, all you got to do is suggest some links and get you a little study group online. Everything's on Zoom anyway. Ain't nobody really traveling. So it really don't matter where you at. All you got to do is log on and you could teach and change the world. I'm an optimist, so I believe it's possible. If we can get out of slavery, we can get out of anything. The plan was in perpetuity. The plan was never to be taught to read. The plan was never to have whole families. The plan was definitely never to lead this nation. Maybe build the White House. Like, if we can upend those plans through our work, through our cunning, through our strategy, coded language with the songs and all that. Like, if we can get ahead of that plan, ain't no plan that evil can devise that we can't overcome. So I am completely confident that they losing and they've been losing and evil ain't gonna win. I know how the story ends, and it ain't with people, relegating people to subhuman status and not recognizing people's full humanity. Last question, right? One more.
Last question.
All right.
Is call to action.
Okay.
I feel inspired. What's the best thing we can all do now about systemic racism?
As I turn up the collar on karaoke. No. Man in the mirror. Because a lot of people say, oh, I hear this information. Let's jump right to solutions. That way I don't got to do any introspection and I could just get to the last phase and I could be a hero and a savior and a woke person. And then I don't have to be complicit. Or you better look in the mirror and see how you are part of this problem. It could just be some things you don't know. You could be a problem unwittingly. I'm not saying it's your fault. I'm not saying there's any intent to be an agent of any of this stuff. But if you look around and be like, Dad, I never thought of that. Well, then you need to figure out why. And you need to get yourself ready. And then you could talk to your partner and your friends and your family. Because a lot of people want to jump out there and save the whole world and have a million. No. What did Booker T? Cast your bucket down right where it's at. There's some people right in your circle that need a thorough drop squad style re-education. You got access to them and influence over them more so than a lot of these other people and these public intellectuals per se. So your battlefield is right in front of you. Sometimes it can be in your own bed. Let me not. See, I done got messy and ratchet. That's what I do best. But yeah, some people don't need to look no further than the mirror or to the left of them. Okay, but yeah. Start where you are. That's what I would say. Start where you are.
Definitely. I do want to remind people that this recording will be on our digital library page, and we will also get the book list to you that Dr. Smith mentioned, a number of recommendations for reading as well as documentaries. So we'll get that information to you as well. And I want to thank you all so much for joining us, and another big thank you to Dr. Smith. Please make sure you take a look at our alumni page, events page at alumni.temple.edu/events, where you can easily find upcoming events, and check out the TUBA page at alumni.temple.edu/TUBA for information on the organization and upcoming events. We do have a Black History Month Trivia Night coming up this Saturday, February 27th at 7 p.m. Thank you all so much. Take care, and we hope you'll stay in touch with your Temple family. Thank you.
See you.